So here we are. I had him do something special for us. Check this out.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Well done.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to be here when no one's here and off season. It gives you there's a quiet, spirit. You can kind of feel the spirits here a little bit.
Mike, it's so great to have you here today. And this is such a special place to be with you in Camden Yards.
With snow in the ground,
with
which is
snow,
not many people get to see it.
Yeah, this is awesome. We're going to talk more about the Oriole thing, but I suspect this has been an incredible thing for you.
It's been a thrill, and I'm just happy to be able to share a little bit of it with you today.
Yeah,
too.
Thank you. And so I guess one of the questions that comes out of this, were you a baseball player as a kid?
I played a lot of sports growing up. My favorite sport to play was probably baseball, but you're not going to believe this, but I played basketball until I became a little bit too, physically challenged to excel, but I actually played basketball in high school. I played soccer in high school, and I played baseball, so I kept busy. I asked myself a lot, like, where did the love of baseball come from? And I loved playing it. It was from my earliest days. It was probably the thing I wanted to do the most. But again, I realized I wasn't gonna become a professional baseball player. So, but I always loved that. I love the game. I love the purity of it. I love the fact that it's actually one of the only sports that you watch in parallel with someone. You're there with your father, your mother, your kids, your grandparents, your friends, and you're having an experience together. Like, there's something about the pacing and the rhythm of how you watch baseball that to me has always been incredibly special.
I would love to see this stadium.
I would love to show you around. Yeah, let's go. We'll see Utah Street and maybe kind of get a feel for the place.
So this Utah Street is open, so it's like a thoroughfare. People will come and standing room only watch the game.
So people watch games from here?
Yeah, beer garden, table, high tops. It's got a really, really good vibe to it. I spent a lot of time down here at games with the fans, with our corporate partners in the community, because that's kind of what's required to be successful. This is an asset of the city and the community. We have a deep sense of civic responsibility to do the best we can to advance the franchise, to advance the neighborhood, and we're going to do everything we can to do that. It is woven into the fabric of the community, and part of the social contract is we're going to put the best team that we can on the field, and you're going to come support them and invest in them.
Yep.
Right. So it's a symbiosis. We have to invest in the community, and they have to invest in the team.
Where does the story start for Mike Arougheti? Where'd you grow up? Tell me about your parents and some of your earlier influences in life.
So I grew up in the suburbs of New York City in Rockland County, which most people think is in New Jersey. It's kind of, it's on the other side of the river. I grew up in a town called New City, which was kind of one of the early, flight out of the city type suburbs.
Yep.
Squarely American, middle class suburb. Grew up in a split ranch home in a housing development. Both my parents were school teachers. When I reflect back on who I am today, their influence as educators, I think is a big, big part of my core value system.
Were they hard on you as a result of being teachers?
It's so funny. I remember them being hard on me. They don't.
When you were a kid, did you have any hobbies that you continue as a professional or as on the personal
I'll tell you,
side?
it's funny. My first means of supporting myself was in middle school, and I would go to the grocery store and I would buy large bags of Dum-Dums and Blow Pops. And I would then break them up and sell them on the bus. So I think my cost of goods was a nickel, and I sold them for 25 cents. So that was my first, foray into free enterprise. And then when I was about 14, which is kind of interesting given my interest in baseball to this day, I started a baseball trading card company called Four Corners Sports Cards.
Huh.
And my parents, back to not being hard on me, but making me go through the required steps, they made me, get a tax ID number and put together a budget and a business plan, do all those things. And I did that for a number of years, driving around to the various, hotels and convention centers. And
so they were supportive of your entrepreneurial desires.
Massively so.
That's
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. So that was, not that I'm trading baseball cards now, but I do think that there were those early sparks of just wanting to, build things and the entrepreneurial bug.
So you went on to Yale. You majored in politics, economics, and ethics.
Yep. I was always intrigued by business and finance, but the degree that I got was actually a pretty broad-based degree. It was, classical philosophy, political science, economics. I could have taken it in any number of directions. And as a 20-year-old, because I actually graduated in 3 years, I didn't really know what I wanted. So I thought maybe I was going to be a lawyer. I actually thought at one point I was going to be a professional chef. I applied to the Culinary Institute of America. It was an awkward time for me because graduating early, I was kind of looking to get into the workforce. I had been putting myself through school a little bit with financial aid, and I was working in the dining hall. But I was off cycle, so while all of my friends were kind of doing what normal juniors and seniors do in college, which is decidedly not look for a job, I was thrust into this world of having to figure out what I wanted to do next. I applied to a couple jobs on Wall Street, and I was lucky that a friend of mine from the year prior at college was an analyst at Kidder Peabody.
Okay.
And so ultimately got an interview there and got a job. And so I started my career as an M&A analyst at Kidder. So that was kind of almost by happenstance that I found my way into it.
So how long did you stay at Kidder, and where did you go after that?
Not very long. I was there for probably a year and a half.
Okay.
I went from Kidder to a place called Indo-Suez Capital, which no one's ever heard of, but it was a very small, pretty substantial merchant bank at the time, given the state of the private markets. And we were effectively using the bank's balance sheet to do some very early LBO financing. Okay. So we were one of kind of the early middle market lenders, if you will. That experience of working within a bank and watching the development of the private equity and the private credit markets, and then feeling the constraints that existed working in a bank, ultimately is what led us to go try to do our own thing. And yes, it was our precursor. It was Smitty, Kip, me, Dave Schwartz, but a bunch of people that are now still very senior people running big businesses at Ares. And it was a light bulb moment for us because we had now worked at two big banks that in theory you would think would want as much of this private credit thing that we were doing as possible, and they just ran out of capacity.
So we've got to talk about private credit. That's a topic nobody ever talks about.
No one ever asked me about private credit.
I'm shocked at that.
People don't have awareness of the scope of the private credit market, and because it's been growing quickly, but also maybe more prominently in the public eye, it's generated awareness of the opportunity, and so maybe people are a little anxious once they see it that, hey, how come I didn't see this before? But what I always try to anchor people on is private credit is credit. So it's not as though private credit firms pick up the phone and call a company or an owner of an apartment building and say, hey, I'm going to make you a loan that you don't have any demand for, and I'm going to take a lot of risk in doing it, right? So you kind of have to just get back to basics, which is private credit is the same as public credit. It's just we are originating the asset directly to the asset owner or the company versus going through an intermediary. But the people who are buying private credit from us, the sovereign funds and the insurance, they're also buying public credit. It's just been a shift in the market. Yeah. So I think you have to zoom out and say, you have banks, you have insurance companies, you have the liquid markets, and you kind of have the private markets. And there's an ecosystem, and each one offers a different product into the market. They're probably more symbiotic than competitive. And so it's not as though the growth of private credit is necessarily has to come at the expense of those others. Everybody can grow together. And we had that aha moment, which is if we have all of this demand from all of these clients for this credit and the banks can't do it, there's got to be, a better way to do it. So we set out really to start a institutional private credit business.
And what were the first set of challenges when you put the thing together?
We talk about this all the time because there's nothing, you've been there, there's nothing more exciting than being in startup mode.
Yep.
And actually, we went into startup mode before we partnered with Ares, who at the time was maybe, 3 billion of AUM. So they were massive compared to what we were doing.
Yeah.
But those early days, the first challenge was like, how do we get an office lease? So hilarious. I went to JP Morgan because we had to sign for the security deposit. And this was probably the largest check that I'd ever written in my life to put the security deposit down on an office space on 3rd Avenue. And when they went into the what was then the security protocol of looking at my signature card for, relative to my signature signature today, for those that have seen it, it's pretty degraded, but they had my, the signature that you all work on when you're, 13 or 14, it looks like you signed the Declaration of Independence. So it took almost a week for them to clear the check because my signature on file was so different from the other ones. That was like the first thing, like, wow, there's some complexities here that we didn't anticipate. And then it's just so funny to think about where we were. This was just a handful of us. I think 12 of us were trying to do this on our own. We went to Best Buy to get our, flat screen TV for the lobby because that's what, big investment firms did. But we got the credit card and bought the floor model so that we could get the discount on the floor model and then the discount, on the credit card. So those were, when we look back on that, obviously that was, a long time ago, but it's still in our, in the back of our minds that we laid our own veneer floor in the kitchen, right? So there's such a deep sense of ownership when you go through something like that.
Like that, to be able to not lose sight of what that felt like.
Totally.
I think is actually a really important part of how you continue to succeed because you remember where it all started.
Yeah, and I think you're never going to, we talk with our people, we're never going to give them the opportunity to get on their hands and knees and lay floor, right? Like we're kind of, fortunately, we've gone past that, but we are always trying to give people that feeling of kind of ownership and innovation and being part of the formation of things. Because I think regardless of where you get on the journey, you have to be able to look back at that moment when you kind of felt like I'm invested.
Yes.
This is mine. I have a sense of ownership and a real sense of accountability to this thing.
So you spent so much of your life around sports. As a kid, you mentioned soccer. I know you're an avid skier. You're a great golfer, and now you own a baseball team. What about sports? What's driving the interest, and probably more importantly, what do you take away from it? In your life every day.
I think, well, at the youth level, and you probably have the same experience playing yourself, I think the things that you learn through sport are difficult to teach elsewhere, right? Being part of a team, sacrificing the individual for the success of the team, learning how to win with dignity, learning how to lose with dignity, discipline, training, like all of those things are things that we want to teach our children and we want to have them carry through life. And as an executive, I think you want to see your employees model that behavior too, right? Coachability, right? Ability to take feedback and self-actualize on it.
What kind of leader are you from a style standpoint when you think about, and there are some folks who are, they're very visceral, like Steve Jobs, classic example, someone very visceral, makes gut decisions, incredible instincts. Other people are much more analytical. Where do you fall out on that?
So much of growing as an executive, I think you've had the same experiences. You have to constantly change your prioritization framework because you have to focus on where you're going to have the most impact. And so I've always said to myself, I want to focus on where I can have impact, not on what I think is important, right? Because that's where I'm going to actually deliver real change, transformational change. So if I'm making a huge decision that's taking real risk with real return, I'm going to do a lot of analytics. And I think your people would tell you, if you ask them, he reads everything and he's in every number, but I won't do that for decisions that, in my opinion, are not going to be consequential.
Got it.
On the people side, and this is maybe a little tweak, I think the people side of any business is 80% of the success, right? The technical stuff kind of takes care of itself. It's, can you get the right people in the right seats, and can all of those people collectively deliver more value as a whole, right? As a coalition than individually. And so, my gut management style is when I'm dealing with people issues, and cultural is very, very visceral and emotional and instinctual, which I think it needs to be. But I have a very hard time making important decisions without having my hands on things.
That makes a lot of sense.
You know, you've grown incredibly significantly over the years, over the 20 years or so. The business is grown, its offices, its headcount, obviously the AUM. Talk about the culture. What are the key tenets of the culture? And as you've grown, how has that evolved?
Yeah, so setting firm culture and abiding it is, I think, the most important thing that an organization can do, right? At the end of the day, good companies are collections of good people, but they have to stand for something and they have to believe in something that's greater than themselves. Otherwise, you can't really accomplish what you set out to accomplish. So we've always been hyper-focused on our culture. We've tried to define it, and if you were to look at our core values, it's collaboration, responsibility, entrepreneurship, self-awareness, and trust.
I get asked a lot, like, what is the one thing you do to drive culture? And I always say it's not one thing, it's 1,000 things. Yeah. And then they never let me off the hook. So I'm not gonna let you off the hook either. So what are the couple of things, the most impactful things that you do to reinforce and to scale the culture?
In order to build and sustain the culture, you have to live the culture. You can't just talk about it, you have to role model the behavior that you want. So for example, self-awareness, which is one of the values that we hold dear, some people might think that's a pretty arrogant thing to say is a cultural value of a company, but what we're really trying to say there is, let's all admit that we're human, let's all admit that we're fallible, let's know what our strengths are and let's know what our weaknesses are and talk about them openly. And if we fail, we should have a high tolerance for taking risk and sometimes failing, but let's then correct. So if I say that that's a core value of the company, which it is, I have to demonstrate it. So I have to be willing to show vulnerability to the people that work for me, that I'm willing to go out and fail and correct, ask for feedback and all of those things. So I think a lot of it is real, to your point about the 1,000 things you do, is the demonstration every day of role modeling the behavior.
A lot of people are unwilling to actually be vulnerable when they're in a leadership position.
I think it's probably one of the biggest challenges, particularly in today's kind of modern world. I think people, there's always this, leaders have to be strong, they have to know everything. I don't think that that's true. I think you have to be honest and human. You have to be willing to be decisive but I think it's the consistency of the character that matters the most. So everyone's going to have a slightly different approach, but I have found my biggest breakthroughs as a leader have come oftentimes at moments where I'm showing vulnerability.
It's interesting. I think one of the least appreciated things around leadership is authenticity. Mm-hmm. And I've heard you talk about relatability, and I think people will follow individuals that they can relate to or they think are authentic. Mm-hmm. People don't want to be spun. Right?
That's right.
And doesn't mean they're going to agree with every single decision, but if they think it's motivated by the right reason, and if they can relate to you, the odds of them following go way up. It sounds like it's exactly what you're thinking when you talk about vulnerability.
I think it's all part of the same thread, right? So if I think about those words, authenticity to me is, am I being my authentic self when I'm showing up to work and leading the company? And I think I am. I obviously, maybe not to the same extent I am with my high school buddies, but I'm showing people who I am, what my values are, what matters to me, what my character is.
So where's the bar that you bought everybody the beer?
Well, it's funny. We had an opening day. We bought two. So the first one is at Pickles Pub, which is over there.
Okay.
And the way that happened is we were on opening day, standing by the opening gates where people were walking in.
Yep.
It was me and David and Mitch and Smitty, and we're shaking hands and just introducing ourselves. And we were like, we got to do something a little spicier. So we said, where do all the fans go?
Yo, listen up! I want to introduce myself. I'm Mike Arougheti, one of the new owners of the O's. We're buying everybody a beer. Let's go!
We bought everyone a beer, and they went crazy. We were in the bar, jumping around with the fans, which was kind of a nice introduction. This goes back to what we were talking about inside, about leadership and that vulnerability and accessibility and authenticity. Right? If you think back to the old model of sports team ownership, right? There's this detachment where the owner's sitting up in some darkened box, looking down and never engaging in the fans. And if you look at modern ownership, and David and myself, David's in the stands of, 30, 40 games a year. He's throwing hats and signing autographs and taking pictures, and we're buying beers for, the fans want that, right? And when you show them that you're a fan and that you're in the community, it has a huge impact.
So part of a great culture is creating a mission, something for people to feel really connected to. And I love what you guys are doing around, obviously generating returns for your LPs, business, job one, but then you're now sharing a percentage of your promote, I think, to give to charity, which I have to imagine is incredibly motivating for your employees. Do you think that helps generate some of your success?
Without a doubt. It goes back to sense of mission and purpose. It's funny, in financial services, the world that we all live in, money tends to be kind of front and center, right? Because you're managing money for someone, you're talking about how much money you're making, who's, what your IRRs are, and you sometimes lose sight of who you serve. And so one of the things that I really tried to shift culturally when I took over as CEO is to really get at the root of who are we serving? Why do we do what we do? Not at the end of the day, we don't show up to generate IRR and make money. That's kind of a byproduct of who we serve. And there was a noticeable cultural shift that happened when you point out to people in our BDC. I can't tell you how many people come up to me on the street if I'm wearing an Ares logo and say, "Don't cut that dividend. I'm living off of it." Or you think about all the state pension
Makes it real.
State pension funds and insurance companies and corporate pension. We're managing the retirements of tens and tens of millions of people. And when you get that deep into the organization, which is, yes, it's great that we can succeed, and if we succeed, our constituents succeed, but put the client first, put the customer first,
Yep.
and know that your performance actually has a real impact on someone's life. So that was a real shift for us as a company, and I'm not sure that there are that many financial services companies that really try to have their people attached to why they're doing what they're doing. And I think, again, all good companies need to have a why.
Yeah.
Why do we do what we do? And so that was a reorientation. And then what was so remarkable about that is this charitable foundation and giving back concept actually happened organically through the people. So we had a PM that was actually leaving a competitor who I had a good personal relationship with, and said, "I want to come work at Ares because of the value system of the company, but I want to come only if I can connect my investing performance to my philanthropy."
Yep.
And he pitched me on the idea of doing just what you said, which is let's take a percentage of our profit dollars, incentive fees, not management fees, and give it back. And then that was just one fund, one PM. It became then one fund, one PM, and all of his people. And then it became almost every fund. And now we have the Ares Charitable Foundation,
Yeah.
which is, if we do well, we could do good in the world,
Yeah.
right? And that's powerful.
Yes.
No one's counting how much money they left on the table by making a commitment to, give a share of the profit into the foundation. It's quite the opposite. So it's been really, it cemented the culture. It was really energizing and electrifying.
So as I said, this is where we have authenticated game-used memorabilia for the current players. So this gets loud action in season. You'll see lineup cards, jerseys, bats, and then, as I mentioned, 100% of the proceeds from this collectible shop goes into the foundation and goes back into the community.
It's incredible.
It's pretty cool.
Really making an impact and creating a lot of fun
Yeah,
in the process. That's great.
Absolutely.
As we walk here, there's just so much to take in. When I think about what you've accomplished, you're the CEO of one of the largest alternative asset management firms in the world. You are a co-owner of one of the legendary sports franchises, you know, in baseball and sports generally, and you built and created an incredible club experience. You've got a lot on the resume there, my friend. What are you most proud of as you stand here today at this point in your life?
That I get to do with the people I love and with my friends.
Yeah.
Just to bring it full circle, there's only so much time we have here, and so you want to do impactful things, charitable things. You want to live a life of service. But for me, it's all about who are you doing it with. So what I'm most proud of is that I've actually found a way to do the things I want to do professionally and personally, but that I've always done it with a focus on making sure that I'm doing it with the people that I want to do it with, and I've been blessed in that respect.
That's powerful. I got one more question for you, and then I'll let you warm up. You know, I feel like so much of life's a lot simpler than a lot of people make it out to be. And I always think that, you know, on a personal level, much of what we need to learn to be successful, we learned as 5-year-olds from our parents.
See, everything I need to know, I learned in kindergarten.
Oh, literally, share your things, say please, say thank you, don't hit your sister.
Yep.
Don't lie. You know, do you have a simplifying philosophy that you live by?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, a lot of it is golden rule, meaning, and this goes back to just style, is treat others the way that you want to be treated. Do the right thing, not the easy thing. And that's been a guiding principle for me and the way that I was raised, but also the company. Like, are we doing the right thing? And make sure that that's your North Star.
Yeah, great stuff.
Thanks,
Dude,
man.
not a shock that you're a success.
Yeah.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Really fun.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yep.